Rumudaka Wanodi is a former CEO of Nigeria Bulk Electricity Trading Company, and now the founder and CEO of ZKJ Energy Partners. Rumudaka, thank you so much for sticking with us on the program. We appreciate your time live to us from our Abuja studios. Thank you so much. And apologies, we just make that correction to your name there. A bit of a misspell. That was on me. Apologies. So let's talk about the this NERC notice of intention. This is how big as it can get in a 2-page center spread advertorial yesterday. I'm sure you've read through the complaints of NERC against these 8 discos. What's your take?
Well, you just have to go back to what's been happening in the last 3 years in the market. In 2016, there was a need to adjust the tariff and make them more cost-reflective. And by some court orders and what have you, that tariff was suspended. And throughout that period up till now, there was no cost-reflective tariff in the market. And 2 things happened with that. One, the regulator was kind of hobbled and it could not exercise its powers because with the distribution companies, if they do not have the tariff, then it's very difficult to hold them to a standard in terms of remittance and payment for the power supply to them, and then also for the Bureau of Public Enterprises, which had entered a share sale purchase agreement with them. It's also difficult to monitor the performance standards that they signed on to. So putting and getting the cost-reflective tariff into the market about 2 months ago kind of gave the regulator some teeth, and I think it's looking to bite, which to a large extent, it's welcomed. Most people expected it, but I think people didn't expect it to come very soon. And the point it's making, the headline is jarring, is jolting to hear about cancellation, but I think the regulator is actually playing to the books because it's just gone to the Electric Power Sector Reform Act, Section 74, and just taking what is provided there, the step towards cancellation or suspension of license. And the first thing is that you put out an inquiry and you have a 60-day period which you allow the licensee to come back and maybe put out reasons why it has not complied with the terms of its license. And I think that's what the regulator is doing at this moment. It's putting the discos on notice and asking them to come back and say why their licenses should not be revoked or any other sanctions that the regulator might choose to impose.
What signal does this center spread newspaper advertorial send to the investment community, both home and abroad?
Well, if you go back, one of the things that has been said and people had criticized the regulator is that it's been absent and that it's been wishy-washy in its regulations and its powers. So it will be jolting, like I said, but at the end of the day, you need to have some form of a regulator in place. And what actually everybody should be looking at is how it goes about this process. Is it going to go about it in a diligent, fair manner, or is it going to be haphazard? The order, I took time to look at it, has actually laid down the facts. And, it might have also be indicative of some frustration by the regulator because if you look at it, the government has been funding and subsidizing the sector, 701 billion 2 years ago, and has just committed another 600 billion in the sector. And the least maybe the regulator or government would expect is that some distribution companies should meet a basic minimum threshold in contribution to the market. And you see the numbers, Bosin, and some are doing as much as 60, 80%, more than 80% of what is required of them. Some are doing less than 50%. And, for investors and for everybody, where some discos are not even making the contribution, it actually does, it impedes investor confidence from coming into the sector.
Yes, talking about the money there, and part of what the NERC laid on this 2-page advertorial has to do with the market remittances by the discos. I'm sure you've seen that on what the shortfall by these 8 discos or power distributors. But part of what the NERC says is the repayment of central bank, CBN, NEMS facility talk about the 701 billion. There's another several hundreds of billions that the central bank is sitting on that should go to this sector. But it looks like the central bank is not ready to let go of this money yet because what is outside hasn't been collected. This is taxpayers' money. So on the flip side, that these power companies would have to look for money to pay what is being owed and, of course, keep in business. Government is still a shareholder here. So how will this notice of cancellation of licenses, how will it work out in practical terms?
Well, like I said, I think that first you have 60 days, which the distribution companies are allowed to come back and tell us what are the mitigating circumstances that had stopped them from making the contributions. NERC was actually smart enough to first and foremost put out the case of ministries and departments and agencies of government debts, because usually that's where this case will point out that MDAs have not paid their bills. And he recognized that and had asked this case to go and make sure that they collect from MDAs. Somewhere along the line, we think that distribution companies will come back and some will buckle up. There might be issues to do with tariff collections and they will make their cases. But I think that eventually it will proceed. But nobody should take this for granted, that it could not lead to cancellation of licenses. I think that everyone, disclosed investors in the distribution company, should take this seriously and make their case if it's required. I think one of the issues that was raised at the time that this tariff came out was there full consultation with the distribution companies as to where this tariff need to be? Well, this is an opportunity to bring those matters to fore and resolve them. The sector cannot continue the way it is. There has to be some accountability, and that accountability will allow investors or anybody who is looking to make investment in metering, in transformer, in cable manufacturing and other things. They want to see that the money is bubbling up from the distribution companies to the market. So some discos are working very hard. They might be able to prove their points, and then others might just have to work harder or exit the market.
Well, the IMF spoke about Nigeria's power sector in the latest staff visit report about Nigeria. Then President Buhari has also talked about that consistently, and he looks to do some reform in that sector. What do you think needs to be done very quickly? Do you think the new agreement with Siemens, the German company, is a way forward? How much do you think we can clean the mess, get our challenges right, both at the upstream end and the downstream end, to the last man in the power sector as quickly as possible? Because we've laid very grand ambition for ourselves in terms of economic revival and outlook.
Yeah, I think that the agreement with Siemens is very key to unlocking the potentials of the sector. The figures that you showed there, we have about 12,000 installed capacity in generation, and we're not quite sure whether our transmission capacity and distribution capacity, that each one of them is above 5,000 megawatts. So you have a lot of stranded power, and this new roadmap would allow, in the next 2 years, 7,000 megawatts to be evacuated and brought to homes and businesses, as against the average of 3,500 that we have here. So that's automatically doubling supply to homes and businesses. And then in another 6 years, you have it to 4 years, you have it to 11,000 megawatts and upwards to 25,000. So that is key, and it should make a lot of difference. But the implementation is one that we have to see. We looked at the budget. We have 127 billion for power for next year. We don't know how much of that is the subsidy that's been agreed with the industry, and how much of that is for this new program. We hope that there is a substantial budget or provision that's been made for actually expanding the transmission and distribution network has been promised by the federal government.
127 billion naira will just be scratching the surface. Do you agree with that? Do you think so?
Yeah, it will be scratching the surface. So we'd like to see exactly, that's just, what's that? $300 million or $400 million. With all the investment that you need to make in transmission and then some in distribution, that is scratching. So we need to know exactly how that will be funded, and that is very key.
What would you recommend for you folks now in the private sector when it comes to this? I'm not sure any bank in Nigeria is ready to open the vault and give money to any disco, not anytime soon that I can think of. So where will this money come from? Where do you think we can get this money very quickly that we need for the sector?
Well, you know, at the end of the day, I think that the government has to guarantee some of the inflows into the sector, but not without any form of securitization, either by shares of the distribution companies or what have you. It's very difficult for banks now to lend to the sector, and you've talked about the 700 billion, the 213 billion earlier on the NERC facility. Then there is this additional 600, which we might consider would be a grant to the industry. It might not be a loan. I'm not sure how that would be worked out. And then there is the acquisition finance. We don't know where that is with the bank. So the sector is highly indebted, and I think that the federal government could guarantee some loans and bonds to get into the sector with the understanding that somewhere along the line, is distribution companies get back, they will pay for that, and investors who are unable to manage the investments and pay back the loans will be forced to exit the space. That is the quickest way to go about that. And then there are also the issues of franchising. If you're able to ring fence some areas, clusters that are more financially viable, then you could find financiers who could finance upgrading the infrastructure around a particular area, like Geometric did in Aba. There's no guarantee. They were able to raise funds initially to put a power plant, ring fence an area, and that model can still work within the footprint of distribution companies. You just need to ring fence them and then be assured that there will be steady supply and therefore compliant customers that will pay their bills. If you ring fence that, you might be able to finance that.
Rumudaka Wanodi, who is a former NBET Chief Executive Officer, thank you so much. This is your industry, and we'll keep checking in with you from time to time. Much progress has been made there. Thank you so much. Have a great day, and we thank you for coming through on the show today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
From Abuja Studio, founder and CEO at ZKJ Energy Partners.